Hello, everyone. My name is Caitlin D. Clark,
And my name is Mohammad Garipur.
and we are the co-founders of the Epidemic Urbanism Initiative, which is hosting today's session and which we will introduce in more detail in just a moment. We'd first like to share a few notes of thanks, first to our wonderful colleagues who have generously shared their time to be part of today's event, and to the community of more than 1,700 people from 91 countries who comprise the Epidemic Urbanism Initiative. Just over 2 years ago, institutions across the US and indeed the world began shuttering amidst the first wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. In March 2020, we began planning what became our May 2020 symposium, Epidemic Urbanism Reflections on History, which brought together academics from a range of disciplines, including architecture, history, medicine, and archaeology, to present case studies of epidemic illnesses across the globe. Two outcomes of this event that we want to share with you include first, our edited volume, which you see here on the right, as well as the founding of the Epidemic Urbanism Initiative, which includes a network of regional liaisons from more than 74 countries and counting. The basic values that guide our work in the initiative include first, the recognition of our shared global vulnerabilities, including to epidemic illnesses, recognition of the need to go beyond silos of disciplines and the academy, and importantly, the need to share knowledge and resources across continents as well as across disciplines and with the general public and policymakers and more. We also realize the need to meaningfully intervene in the social inequities and vulnerabilities that have persisted over time and across global geographies, which are fundamental drivers of health and health inequity and broader social inequities. And of course, to do this, we must find new ways of working and intervening, which brings us to today's session.
Today's session, Architectural Education and Design Pedagogies, Global Perspectives and Challenges of Inclusivity, Health and Resilience, builds on these ideas by addressing a range of timely questions for architectural education and design pedagogies provoked by simultaneous global challenges of COVID-19, social and racial inequity, migration, and climate change, to name just a few. In the spirit of the Epidemic Urbanism's commitment to meaningful change, this panel asks not only how architectural pedagogy has shifted in response to issues of access and equity in a COVID-induced online setting, but also more urgently, what might it look like if we take the lessons of the last 2 years seriously? For example, how might the practice and education of architecture need to change to confront the many vulnerabilities in urban settings rendered visible by COVID-19? What role can and should architectural education and design pedagogies play in this shift? We hope this conversation will eliminate key ideas to guide practice and education and highlight innovative strategies undertaken in participating institutions. It is my pleasure to introduce our panel chair, as well as our esteemed panelists who represent a wide range of institutions and global geographies. Dr. Ashraf Salama, Professor of Architecture and Director of Research and Cluster of Architecture and Urbanism in the Global South at the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow, UK, will be moderating today's session. Dr. Salama will be joined by 10 panelists whom we will introduce with just names and titles now, no biographies in order to maximize time for discussion. First, Dr. Kıvanç Kılıç, Architecture Vice Dean at Kadir Has University in Istanbul, Turkey. Dr. Hermi Delport, Project Leader at Stadio Higher Education Institution in South Africa. Dr. Lindy Osborne Burton, Associate Professor of Architecture at Queensland University of Technology in Australia. Dr. Alice Benti Ismail, Associate Professor and Architecture Director at University Technology in Malaysia. Dr. Ana Likazic, Associate Professor and Vice Dean for Education and Research at the University of Belgrade in Serbia. Dr. David Rifkin, Director of the School of Architecture at the University of Florida in USA, and Dr. Christina Malathoni, Faculty of the University of Liverpool in the UK. Dr. Hassan Radwan, Professor and Director of the School of Architecture and Planning and Design at Mohammed Polytechnic University in Morocco, Professor David Gloucester, who served as the Director of Education from 2006 to 2021 at the Royal Institute of British Architects in the UK, and finally, Merilis Nepomukci, Associate Dean of Faculty and Program Development at Florida International University in the USA. A brief note to our audience members. We do invite you to share any questions you have in the Q&A box. Please note that we may not have time to get to all questions today due to the large number of participants. Please be patient, and please know that we will save and share our all questions with panelists for future conversation and reflection. With that, Ashraf, now we turn the mic over to you.
All right, okay. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and I'm really very pleased to be joined by this distinguished panel of international academics, heads of schools, colleagues, who are having responsibilities in various capacities in shaping the future of architecture education and design pedagogy. And I would like to take this opportunity to unpack some of the key implications in just a few minutes with a view to frame the questions and trigger the conversation. So that's the entire purpose. So we all know that the COVID-19 condition generated significant and critical questions about the challenges facing architecture education, about the challenges facing the established 2-century-old canons of education, architecture, and urbanism. And this includes really questioning their suitability, these canons' suitability when applied to post-pandemic environment. What the future of architecture might be in the context of the current university system, or in the context of global social environmental challenges. The impacts and the repercussions of the condition that the global community is currently facing, I would say, were originally predicted since maybe late 80s, early 90s, through many studies and through many experiments on paperless design studios, digital design studios, and we have seen these experiments in the early 90s, and also the work of visionaries like William Mitchell and Castells, who talked about the rise of the network society and all of these important ideas. So, which tell us that transitioning from the physical to the virtual is not new. It was called for 30 years ago. But what is new is the sudden shift and the intensity of virtuality that most organizations, communities, higher education institutions were not prepared for. And of course, in addition to the scale and level of the urgency. From a historical perspective, and this is a very important question, do we want to see our response in terms of architecture education response to the pandemic condition as an isolated incident, or we want to see it as part of the context of the evolution of architecture education, the history of architecture education over the past 200 years? So from a historical perspective, architecture schools around the world have been challenged since the 60s due to various forms of social and environmental transformations, trying to improve architecture education through the introduction of many types of pedagogies, and that are labeled under different names: critical pedagogy, transformative pedagogies, which are committed to be student-centered, to shape the studio objectives and processes, and to the integration of research and critical inquiry into design. we can see the growth also over the past 10 years, the emergence and growth of what we call the social construction model of design pedagogy, which includes community-based design learning, life build, design build projects, life project pedagogies. All of these took place over the past 10, 15 years. So now, in meeting the COVID condition, cautiously but optimistically, architecture schools are currently exploring possibilities to expand the role of architecture education, to expand the original aim of graduating architects, young architects, who can meet the needs of the profession, to a broader role and practice that empower them to create opportunities for themselves. Schools of architecture are also trying to embed learning opportunities and multiple learning opportunities, and move students from passive listeners to active learners, and from knowledge consumers to knowledge producers. So all of these issues are taking place within what we call now, and this is just an invention of our own, the transitional emergency model. So right now we are operating within a transitional emergency model of architecture education, last 2 years, which has a number of characteristics based on utilization of online technologies, enhanced IT resources, enhancing assessment tools, protocols, online events, and cultural and recreational activities. So this panel discussion, we reflect on this model, but we really want to go as a core aim beyond this and build on the current efforts of architecture schools. We have 3 key points that we establish as a catalyst for the conversation. And both can be seen from a pedagogical and professional perspective. So the first is about inclusivity, how it relates to pedagogy within architecture education, and how it can be addressed in designing for societies our graduates seek to serve. Likewise, health, how it can be addressed within the education system, and how it can be addressed in design for the future and other society and communities. Resilience of the educational system itself, and resilience of the environments we design for the future. So embedded within these 3 points, resilience, health, and inclusivity, we also raise the question of, are we really moving to a new normal that fights to stay the same? Or are we moving to a new fluctuating condition that requires agile and adaptive systems to effectively predict and react to change? So with this, I would like to start with our first question by asking each panelist to respond to this prompt. Basically, please highlight key challenges specific to your context, specific to your involvement at the time of the pandemic and currently. And we know that there are many challenges. So in your reflection, please address one or more of the issues of content, process, teaching style, issues with international students, issues with validation and accreditation, enrollment and attendance, engagement, all of these as part of the challenges. So please, you have a couple of minutes each to kindly comment on this. So I will start, actually, the first next to me is Lindy. So please, Lindy, go ahead.
Thank you, Professor Salama, and thanks so much for your great introduction. I'm delighted to be here on the panel and to answer this question. I just want to start with just acknowledging the Turrbal Niagara as the First Nations owners of the lands where my institution, being Queensland University of Technology in Brisbane, Australia, stands. and the Wurundjeri Burra clan of the Yungabar peoples on whose land I work and live. And that's where I am at the moment. It is after 11 o'clock at night on a Saturday night here. So I've just got a few key points, and actually my points are developed from work that you and I have done together, Professor Salama. But they things that I really believe were very impactful at the time, but continue to have impact. So in answering your question about is this the new norm, there are issues that we're still trying to address. So firstly, having access to high-end computer graphics and paywalled software, since much of this is unaffordable to students and thus only available on campus. We found that was a big issue for students, and also that many students also struggled with access to reliable, continuous and high-speed internet access. We found, and we continue to find, that international architecture students who return to their home countries and they are continuing to study remotely and online, they faced additional difficulties of online limitations, including access to appropriate technology, software, and some online collaboration platforms and social media portals. We found, and we continue to find, that many financially vulnerable students faced even more challenges due to a severe lack of digital resources, inappropriate online infrastructure, and in some cases even unreliable or limited access to electricity. Also, academics were required to reconsider how they manage diversity, equity and inclusion in both online and blended environments, and at the moment, in our context, in hybrid environments. And in particular to rethink the design, review, feedback and assessment practices through an inclusive framework. And of critical importance were attempts to help students to feel a sense of belonging, no matter who they were or where they were located. And finally, and this is probably for me the most important point, was the concerning reports of plummeting mental health which required us as academics to constantly refine and modify our teaching approaches and to focus more on offering authentic, connected, co-learning and co-teaching, albeit through screen-based digital environments. And we are absolutely still seeing that very much in place. I haven't seen any drop in mental health, that amplified mental health conditions.
Okay, thank you very much. Hermie, please. Go ahead. Hello.
As always, yes. As always, one just has to find the mute button quickly. Thank you so very much for the opportunity to be a part of this discussion. It's really a privilege to be here. I believe that against the background of COVID and the local and global challenges of inequality and inequity and our environmental crisis, the responsibility of our profession is greater than ever before. And as an architectural profession, the scope of the architectural profession keeps on growing, and also the knowledge that we require to address this. In order to address all these challenges, we need to enable our students to make full use of the opportunities that come from new technologies and improved ways of applying existing technologies. And with technologies, I refer here to tools that we have to teach with, but also to the tools, materials, and methods which we function and operate with in society and with which we design and build. My context is South Africa, a country that faces huge disparity in income and opportunity and has vast inequity born from a history of apartheid. This inequity includes students not having the same standard of education when entering into a tertiary institution, and this has been apparent even long before COVID. And often the students who are least prepared to enter into tertiary education would also have a lack of resources. For example, in South Africa, data is quite expensive. And when we had to shift online, just for students to attend sessions and to submit projects, takes a huge amount of data, and that was a big challenge, especially in the beginning of COVID. Then we also have continued electricity shortages. We even have a specific name for that called load shedding. So we would joke about being in load shedding and lockdown at the same time, and really that provided a big challenge for everybody. It still continues, and it has continued for the past 15 years. addressing social justice through our architecture is embedded in the curricula of many universities in South Africa, and that is often addressed through live and design build projects, which you also referred to Professor Salama. And this is by giving students real opportunities to get involved with the lived experience of the reality of the majority of South African people. And that's the reality of a lack of adequate housing, transport challenges, no work, and real poverty. And some of our students also are part of that community, living in those conditions. And during the lockdown, it was difficult to continue with these types of social projects. To make a real difference in the social fabric, we need architectural professionals who practice in this space, not just through the projects that we provide them at university, but also as professionals. And it means that in our education, we need to focus on equipping students by giving them the knowledge and tools to do so. And it goes beyond, it implies going beyond immersing students in the real projects, but we also need to equip them to find opportunities for themselves once they are in practice and to make a living from working as professional social architects. What stood out for me during this sudden shift was the enhanced empathy that architectural educators had for their students. And I think that's something that we're also starting to embed in our students, this extended empathy that we have for everyone around us.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you. Alice, please.
Yep. Okay. Thank you so much for having me here, Professor Ashraf Salama. Actually, I'm from Malaysia, from University of Technology. And if you're looking into a lot of Malaysian architecture school during the pandemic, actually, there are three main key challenges that is actually come about, which is the first one is involving the quality of the architecture education itself. So in terms of the how do we handle the curriculum delivery in terms of the teaching and learning practices? So this is kind of a big issue in most of our architecture school in Malaysia. And if you're looking on how do we maintain the methods of conducting the critic process, and this is actually very vital when you talk about studio as the main core or the main body of learning and educating the architecture students. And another issue that we face is that the challenge on how to promote the idea and the ideology of the hidden curriculum value by without exposing students to have a kind of a real life experiential learning on site. Like how do they communicate firsthand with the society, like meeting the clients and so forth, and having the connection with the industry firsthand. So another issue that we also face in terms of the curriculum is that the unplanned alternative learning strategies, because the pandemic COVID actually happened all of a sudden. And one of the big issues is that we have to handle everything using online and also using digital learning. So this is actually exposing students to a lot of challenges in terms of how do they balance themselves in terms of knowledge and interconnecting the understanding of architecture education between theory, application, and also practical training. And one of the big challenges that is facing also for the academician is that how do we handle a synchronous kind of assessment, and how do we handle exams, especially for the non-studio subjects. So this is quite critical, especially in terms for the academics and the faculty members, because most of the academics faculty don't have a really good skill in terms of to handle multimedia and also digital exposure in terms of that. And also most of our university in Malaysia also having lack of access in terms of our hardware and also our software. And in terms of the challenges, we're looking into students also. There is some sort like a digital equity gap, which involves affordability and also unequal access to internet and also to all of these digital facilities. And also the biggest challenges among students is how to develop the students' attributes in terms of their soft skill and generic skills, because most of the students work independently and they don't have peer reviews, or they actually to have lost their social disconnection from their classmates and also from their peers. And one of the main critical issues in the Malaysian universities is during the pandemic is of course when the we talk about the work-life balance issue, which actually, if you look into the last 2 years during the pandemic COVID, there's a high number increasing of level of stress and anxiety amongst our students, and the number of students drop out and also deferment rate between the year 2020 and 2000 academic year is actually quite high compared to previous years before the pandemic COVID. So this is quite a big challenge, especially for the architecture school in Malaysia to handle these kinds of issue. If we look into these challenges involving curriculum delivery, involving the readiness of the academics and the faculty members, and also involving the students' work-life balance itself, and also not to talk about the availability for the online teaching and learning facilities, where there's not much robust infrastructure that can support both faculty needs, the students, and also the academicians. Yeah, that's quite a big challenge for us here in Malaysia, especially in our institution.
Okay, thank you, thank you. Christina, please.
Hello, everyone. Very nice to meet you, and thank you for having me here. I'll start a little bit with where I'm based, and then I'll build on that. So I'm based in the UK. I'm at the University of Liverpool, Northwest England, so the School of Architecture in Liverpool. One particularity, we are not unique in that, but I know not every department is like that. We have a big collaboration with a partner university in China. So in addition to home students and individual international students, we do have a very substantial cohort, percentage of our cohort that is from China. They do an articulation program. So when COVID hit, a lot of the students were stuck effectively in China. And we have all the problems we have in webinars like this with all the different time zones. But when you're talking about a course, delivery of a course, you get this disconnection where it's very difficult to coordinate tutors with students, have the whole cohort of students come together to attend, for example, reviews, even if they're online. So what in a traditional architectural education environment, I think personally, and I would believe most of us would agree, the big strength is the studio culture, where you interact a lot, both faculty and students, and that's where you get your sense of belonging and your peer support as well as tutor support. And that's what with the best will in the world and with all the online tools, tutors were trying to provide, and a lot of students were very positive about how they did receive support, but they did lose this bigger community and this more relaxed community where you work side to side with your colleagues. And as I said, we saw that especially in the first year. Second year has been a little bit softer because a lot of students are back on campus with hybrid systems. But the first year was very, very challenging for everybody. And I think it's made people appreciate it a little bit more, which is, the silver lining from what we've experienced. I think what it also highlighted is this very big challenge and opportunity, how we are all exposed to the global and the local, because our immediate environment was coming much more to the foreground, and with students being based in different parts of the world, sometimes this is being lost when you move to another country to study, and you're being absorbed in the local environment there. But if you're based in your own place and you're exposed through online means, sometimes your local environment becomes more visible to your colleagues who come from different places. So I thought that was a very interesting challenge for an opportunity for everyone to engage intellectually, if not actually visiting the place. One, very briefly, another role I have is in our level 2, which is the School of the Arts. I've been Associate Dean for Education in the past, and at the moment I hold a role that relates to academic integrity, and I'll mention very briefly on that. But mental health, for example, was mentioned, and I've seen a lot of cases where we know the online environment offers immense opportunities to everybody and to students, and sometimes we overestimate how savvy they are with digital stuff, and ourselves, I think. And there are predatory organizations that are really targeting students. It's not a unique situation in England. I know it's international, and we've seen that increasing so much, and it adds to the pressure. And I think we must turn it into an opportunity that we need really to help our students become more and more critical, because usually how they're being targeted is that these organizations offer them the tutoring they're missing from us. And I think it's a very big challenge that we're all facing, but it's a challenge we must take on board and work with, because it will give them skills for life, how to be very critical about where they turn for information, for knowledge, for support.
Okay, thank you. David, please, David Gloucester.
Thank you very much. I'm very grateful for the invitation, and it's a complex thing, I think, adding to so many insights from so many colleagues from so many different global perspectives. But one of the things which I caught, I think your phrase, Ashraf, the intensity of virtuality, I thought was a very vivid description. And of course, I think one of the things that we found persuasive was the potential inclusivity that remote working afforded students. But it comes at the cost of this paradox of potential isolation, which Christina, I think, just talked about the vitality of peer group learning. I've come at answering this question from a slightly different perspective, primarily from the role that I had at the RIBA for the last 15 years, because as a validating body, we were responsible for academic standards in around 120 schools of architecture globally, using the criteria for validation as a benchmark. And this is kind of quite an interesting role to have been involved in, because it meant that we were looking at schools in North America, Latin America, Scandinavia, the European Union, Middle East, all the way to China. And these criteria, therefore, have, for better or worse, quite a hook into the outputs of schools. And also Marilis and Ashraf were my former colleagues in the UIA, and that was a separate system also, which was working independently. And these are kind of moderating systems in a way. From the perspective of the RIBA, working with all our key stakeholders, I'd rewritten the criteria during 2018-19. We thought there'd be this glorious implementation in 2020. Well, of course, the global pandemic had different ideas about this. But I think the key contextual points was the time of the new implementation. We believed that there needed to be significantly more evidence in students' outputs on the ability to strategize and realize resource efficient and truly sustainable architecture through understanding better the building physics and construction technologies which are essential for low and zero carbon projects. So I think that was a major headline. And I think the new criteria also stressed the need for a significantly more ethical and responsible approach to life and health safety in all architectural projects. You know, the role of architects and architecture is always essentially one of serving commerce. And you know, this poses its own moral challenges. And we felt it was important in terms of these critical issues of life and health safety that we need essentially to define a Hippocratic oath for architects. And overall, to reposition the architect as a moral, professional and progressive force for the completion of socially beneficial and truly inclusive design briefs. And I think I can remember literally gazing at the sky sometime in March 2020, and those skies had been cleared of aeroplanes, and the streets of London and many European cities, many world cities were devoid of cars. And I naively believed we could and would actually, in a post-pandemic society, seek to fundamentally reconfigure the social relations of the city and of the workplace, and optimistically introduce a more positive life-work balance, and see the pandemic actually as a catalyst for a healthier and innovative new urbanism, which was significantly less dictated by the demands of capital. And what am I going to conclude from this naivety at my advanced stage of life? I think I was wrong. I think I was wrong. And I think this is something which we could touch again in our responses to other poignant questions which this discussion raises. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, David. Shivansh, please.
I was muted. Classic. Thank you very much, Ashraf. Well, I worked at 2 different universities in Lebanon and Turkey at the time of the pandemic. And in both cases, I was wearing an admin hat, like most of my colleagues here, I believe, as well as teaching my courses. And in the case of Lebanon, courses had become online intermittently starting from September 2019 because of the economic crisis and the uprising there. And then on, until very recently, like the rest of us here, I lived with this and within this reality away from campus. And most of my time was spent in crisis management and solving everyday problems about the logistics of online teaching, connection problems, and tweaking the content of courses to fit with this new reality in our lives. Of course, there were issues beyond our control, like international students getting stuck on campus or in their dorm rooms for a long time as the airports were shut down or a lockdown was in place. Or some international faculty made quick decisions to leave and be close to their families. Though I think most of what we did in the past few years can be considered emergency remote teaching rather than proper online education, and Professor Salama mentioned this in his opening remarks as well. We were basically tailoring the existing curriculum and course content to respond to the remote teaching mode, like using tools like Zoom and WebEx, and like how we can use the annotate tool, for instance, like with our tablets to give feedback to students. And there is one thing, and we have since discussed among friends and colleagues, obviously the good thing was that going online enabled teaching and learning beyond physical borders. You can invite people over to your reviews and from different parts of the world now, and it therefore potentially provides a more collaborative space. On the other hand, as was mentioned here, the first year students suffered the most. I'm teaching first year basic design studio myself, so they had to encounter with design and architecture remotely. But what happens then when we get back to the face-to-face dominated model and to campus, right? Should we then always have a backup plan to imagine the online versions of our courses, or perhaps design some of them to be fully online at all times, as it seems some content work just fine under the circumstances and without much physical touch with the classroom. But then what about the students who cannot easily access to such tools and technologies, right? And with such questions in mind, I'd like to end for now, and we'll elaborate more on relevant issues in the second round, I hope. Thank you.
Thank you, Shivansh. Hassan, please.
Thank you, Ashraf. Do you hear me, please?
Yes.
Yes, good. So maybe I will pursue the line of David instead of repeating what other colleagues have mentioned, because we had the same challenges. I mean, curriculum performance, faculty members' performance, students' performance, and how we can align the content of courses in a virtual way. And I think that was a challenging period, but also was a very innovative period to change the mindset, the way we look at architectural education, especially that architectural education is centered around ateliers, studios, around the notion of the project. And how can we move to the fab design lab that we have in the fabrication level, and the students, they are stuck at home, and even suppliers, they cannot get the materials to do even so. Therefore, we were substituting a lot of physicalities of the education, or the materialization of the project within homes. And this is why we resorted to virtual reality, augmented reality. And I think the good news that the campus where I am, Mohammed VI Polytechnic University, is the most advanced technology-based university that was designed for Africa by the King of Morocco. And I think that was, we were like just mentioning a lot of ideas. We are technology advanced, we are digitally very like flagship university, but trust me, we did not know what they mean, those terms, smart, etc. But when the crisis came, then we realized, wow, there are a lot of things to be done. It's not just by having tools. And even we became like the hub for a national scale to provide courses for primary schools, secondary schools, etc. And they were designed and of course filmed in our studios. And therefore the challenge was how a faculty member will move from the real classroom and sit in a studio and then face a virtual board. And we needed to do like an adaptation time. I think all of you witnessed at least 2 months, at least 2-3 months. Faculty members, they were disturbed. Students, they were overwhelmed. There is also stress, psychological stress. And then, of course, I don't want to dwell on that point. The most important thing, as Ashraf mentioned, also accreditation. I mean, we are obliged to give performance ratio, and in terms of the quality of the delivery of the faculty member, what kind of evaluation, cheating problems in exams, and even we are faced here with concours national, the national competition to get to the school, and we have more than 5,000 candidates, and we need to get just 45 students, and then we had this student cheating over the first part of the competition. And what we do, so we started finding all kinds of innovative ways, to use cameras, use stuff, and the university actually got very, very, very improved in terms of digital also softwares of managing the campus online, like Sony's Blackboard. And now, after the post-pandemic period, as David mentioned, we are actually really performing well, since the campus is a remote one, even in the vicinity of Marrakesh, which is far away from the main capital. And therefore, we have also international faculty members from different universities over the world. And therefore now, thanks to the pandemic, I mean, not just to talk about challenges, of course, the second round, we'll talk about lessons, I know, but Ashraf, I need just to mention one thing. Within the pandemic, the School of Architecture, of course, was also invited to work on a lot of projects, research projects, and we got a lot of funding. Like, for instance, health infrastructure performance in urban systems related to hygiene and health. And now we have a huge lab working on that. The second one in territorial simulation, or simulation of territorial performance and innovation, especially we are a poor country, and therefore we need to work on this social inclusion, social divide. And just for information, we had students, they did not have even to get a phone line. Forget about having a cell phone. So therefore, the university paid for their gadget just to get them connected, even they are in a rural village far away, because we felt we are very engaged. And university, thanks to their politics of social inclusion, our students are all our members of the family, and we cannot let any of our students be discarded just because of this discrimination of digital inclusion. And thanks to this experience, I got like the 5th rank of an international project that I won with the International Union, Communication Union, within a School of Architecture on digital inclusion and learning systems in architecture and urban studies at the scale of Africa. And now we are doing it with the United Nations Communication Union. The other thing, I launched the Social Innovation Lab. Why I'm saying that? I am also underlining what David said, how schools of architecture, they should think out of the box. Honestly, I founded this school, and they was talking about 4 principles of the school. And then I was so delighted. I'm not showing off here. I was so delighted. I was criticizing how we are so interlocked in object, and we forgot about the human sense. And therefore, I have 4 principles that I found so relevant in the epidemic. Like, for instance, smartness. It's not about just gadget, human intelligence. Number 2, human-centered solutions. Human-centered solutions. Number 3, we should not be imprisoned in working on the shell of a box, but rather on multi-scale dimension, especially in developing countries. We cannot just work on the veneer of a facade of a building with a signature. We should actually include a human factor, a human sense. What is this human sense? And therefore the inclusion. And the last part is actually the question of being multidisciplinary. I think what this crisis actually pushed us within campuses, even in a school of architecture, we should not be that departmentalized. And hence the importance of people specialized in AT, specialized in software, specialized in digital learning, specialized in engineering. And now at the scale of the university, the students, they were studying the material, structural systems. Our professors, they've now developed softwares through VR, augmented reality, to do experimentations with students digitally. So last, but I will conclude, Ashraf, it's so important to think beyond the question just of making an atelier, teaching it online. What kind of this new normal that would be a catalyst to think about the challenges of a near future that is more challenging than the past, and we may think. And Ashraf, you agree with me, history, theory, and criticism of architecture with Miss Van der Rohe, Corbusier, stuff like that. Now I think with Alan Mesk and all this space architecture now, I think we need to think out of the box, and it is time to look at these challenges as elements of opportunities. Thank you, Ashraf.
Thank you very much. Marlies, please, your thoughts, your reaction to this?
Thank you very much, Ashraf, and thank you, colleagues, for the invitation to speak with you today. I'll be brief, and I'll just begin by echoing some of David's rueful look back at some of the aspirations that RIBA had about relaunching, sort of reaffirming the central and critical ethical role of the architect in society through new validation or accreditation procedures. Because the pandemic coincided not only with my role at the UIA Education Commission, role I share with Ashraf now and did with David then, but also with my presidency of the NAAB in the United States, the National Architectural Accrediting Board. And it too had just done exactly the same, created a new set of conditions and procedures that were intended to launch an entirely new way of addressing the role of architecture education, and had all of the same difficulties and all of the same conundrums. To talk a little bit about my context, I work and live in Miami, Florida. I teach at Research One Urban Public U.S. Institution of Higher Education. Our city is at an international crossroads. Our student body is international, polyglot, multicultural, demographically, and maybe most importantly in this context, economically diverse. It is a majority minority institution, Hispanic serving, with over 60,000 students. And in its US context, it's one of the largest public universities in the United States. It's a land grant institution, which means that its mission is access, and it's very proud of its role as the successful facilitator of social mobility in our region. And many of our students are first generation college students, the first in their families to attend university and to study a profession. So in that context, COVID had raised a lot of challenges for our students and for our institution. And we did what we were able to do, though we are in a very, we're in a tropical climate, which was helpful under COVID conditions. The campus remained open, even though we were not having in-person classes, but Wi-Fi access remained available to anyone who wanted to be outdoors, sitting and working. The institution provided many, many laptops to all of its students who didn't have them. They also lent out Wi-Fi hotspots for places that didn't have access to internet access. We spent a lot of time and a lot of energy raising funds for scholarships and for grants to raise money for students in support of keeping graduation rates on track. And we developed really extensive, and for us, sort of first time, very successful communication networks to keep everyone in our community informed. We had special outreach to our international students who, as all of you have already mentioned, had very specific challenges. Our enrollments remained high, which we were grateful for, at least in architecture, not in all elements of the university. And as we returned to in-person learning, we were able to do a lot of outdoor activities, outdoor classrooms and films and events. As you may know, the pandemic coincided in the United States with a number of social justice movements, Black Lives Matter, Me Too, any number of issues that raised important questions and provoked very relevant student activism. With the growth of civility codes, we changed our curriculum. Rather wholly, we revisited its content and its relevance with respect to resilience, in all of the broad definitions of resilience. We looked at decolonizing our history and theory curriculum, as well as all of our curricula. We looked at different project types within our studios. Our lectures, our events, just like this one, were on Zoom, which meant that they were in many ways richer than they had ever been before. And many innovations that were already in progress were accelerated. We created a new range of modalities to deliver instruction. We launched a new doctoral program as well as a new architecture program. We created Digital Futures, which is an open source online platform for debate about the future of the discipline, and got as many as thousands of students listening in on the work that we were talking about. And we saw a really expanded role for technology in our curriculum and in our research. Like my colleague who just spoke, there was a lot of success in grantsmanship, especially focused on automation, technology, and the future of work. The experience has and continues to be a real mixed bag in terms of challenges and opportunities. And I will echo a sentiment stated earlier that issues of mental and emotional health continue to be very real, and that we are addressing those as our students move back into in-person learning. And we address gaps that resulted from the lack of the in-person exchanges over the last 2 years.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for all views in expressing the challenges and positioning current efforts. And I see what is really important here is that we are talking about challenges, but at the same time, in a very positive way, in terms of moving toward the future, unlike many of the previous discussions at the beginning of the pandemic, where everything was about challenges and how can we cope. Now we are moving to trying to look at solutions or visions or views and successes and what we can learn from this. So going to the second question, we all know that there have been a lot of discussions, intensive discussions about blended learning, digital learning, all of that. And much of that really was covered in your points. But without focusing on blended learning as a mode of delivery and engagement, I just want to focus on the two ideas and how we overcome them, the two problems or challenges of equity and access, because I think in all of your responses, you mentioned something about inclusivity versus isolation. For example, David was talking about this, but all other colleagues were talking about, digital equity, access of international students, empathy with issues related to students. All of this is really very important. So the issue of equity access when it comes to education resources maybe is important to reflect upon. So if we have a couple of responses to this question, that would be really important, especially in contexts where technology and online infrastructure is really very weak and challenged already. So I would really invite colleagues from the Southern Hemisphere, whether Hermie, Lindy, Alice, Hassan, about this idea of equity and access. So can we go with Hermie, please?
Thanks, Ashraf. Yes, that's a challenging question. I'm going to start by just reflecting on what my own institution is busy with, SARIO, and in moving forward after the initial 2020 rapid shift that we had to do, there's been a real structural change in the whole institution, in the sense of moving forward with a different mode of teaching, where there is a blend between being on campus and being in an online space. It is quite prescriptive, and I can already see the challenges that it is bringing for students that sometimes cannot attend a live session, and then it's not available online. And for me, that signifies that the way that we need to move forward would be to in a sense, make available to students, to include everybody, whatever we offer, it must be offered in a way that people can access it, whether it is a live session or whether it is recorded or written somewhere. There must be different modes of interaction for the same content that we deliver and the same projects that we deliver. And I think that is challenging because it takes a lot of resources, and it takes a lot of design and pre-planning in order to do that. And I think we all saw with the rapid shift how much time it takes and how difficult it is to do that in advance. But now we've lived through all those challenges, and moving forward, we can use all those lessons to change what we are doing. And yeah, in South Africa, I think our challenges remain, as I've said before, especially for students that even cannot travel to campus. So in a way, we need to take the learning to them, and it's not always possible to do it online. So remote studios and studios in the location where the students are living are also options that we are investigating moving forward.
Excellent. Okay, thank you, Hermie. Alice, please. You emphasized digital. You said the word digital equity. So, can you just tell us a little more on this?
Yeah, okay. In the context of my institution, which is the University of Technology Malaysia, is that we talk about digital equity here, is that we actually get a lot of supports, especially from the government, and also supports from the faculty members itself. So in this sense is that we work hand in hand, cooperating together also with the professional body, which is the Malaysian Architecture Association, and also looking into giving scholarships also to students, and also getting the students these benefits in terms of accommodating them with a lot of resources, like providing laptops and things like that. But in one sense, when we talk about digital equity, also we're talking about how we're going to bring the education and provide a personalized kind of education to students. So in this sense, we're looking into giving a lot of intervention into specific specific skills areas of students. When you're looking at architecture students, they have talents in so many different ways, like in many multidisciplinary areas. Like for instance, for first year, they may have skills doing more into like sketchings and things like that. So in this sense, we're giving them more opportunity in terms of in terms of developing their skills rather than using digitals. Maybe they can use hand tools and things like that in terms of to modify and also to develop their skills and also develop their understandings into architecture. So this is more when we talk about supporting the students' needs in that sense. So digital equity doesn't mean also looking into the technology or the machinery part of it, but also looking into how develop the understanding of upskilling and reskilling, the understanding knowledge of the students and also of the lecturers in terms of how they develop their skills in terms of digital. So this is also very quite important. So like for our institution in Malaysia, there's a lot of programs, workshops, and things like that that is actually we're giving free to the lecturers and also to the students to develop their skills in terms of the digital knowledge and things like that. Yeah. So
Very
I
good.
think that's all. Yeah.
Thank you. Hassan, please.
Thank you, Ashraf. I think thank you, Ashraf, for framing the key terms. I think beyond the digital equity, we should more talk about social equity when it comes to the South. It's just not question of some smart gadgets that these students they don't have, but they don't have also the context at home to learn, and no one is thinking about that. And this is why at the Mohammed VI Polytechnic University, I think we're looking at this issue in a wider scope. And Mary-Lise actually mentioned the questions of scholarships. And I'm very delighted in my school, for instance, 90 students, 90% of the cohort, they are covered by 100% scholarship. And this is actually the strategic role of governments. I mean, we cannot solve the question just by universities giving a couple of cell phones to students. I think this is a decision. And we call it in French, ascenseur social. That means how can we bring students from poor strata, from poor families with a strategic decision to help them be to the next level and part of the decision making of the future of a country. And hence this actually succeeded in our campus, in our school. And the good news, these students, they are very bright. And then when we get them the means, they really flourish. And this is why actually this digital equity cannot occur without social equity to make them themselves feel they belong. They belong to a luxurious campus, they belong to high quality university education, etc. On the other hand, actually, what the role of this social equity to prepare like the future architects who are coming from poor families or poor social groups, and what their role in the future. And in my mind, Tony Garnier, the son of a worker who devised la cité industrielle, the industrial town, and just because of his father. And thanks to that, we have now the premises of the modern city that came from the son of a worker. So we need to learn from history. So please, I think the shift is not just like thinking about helping people because they are poor, but rather transforming people to be the future leaders. Architecture, urban planning, design is one of the key métiers that they would actually contribute to the true sustainable development of southern countries. Thank you.
Okay, very, very, very good. Thank you very much, Hassan. I think, of course, the discussion on the issue of inclusivity definitely should go beyond like digital equity and all of this, and engage with the broader social issues. And in that, really, I'm raising another question other than the set questions, which is about working with communities. Before the pandemic, we were calling for working with communities whether in participatory practices or engaging with communities, visiting communities on the ground, and all of that, person or face-to-face level of engagement. What is happening now, or what happened during the pandemic, whether this practice was put aside, or what happened really, especially in studios that focus on community design learning, life projects, and all of this. Any views on this? So, and I will leave it.
Ashraf? Okay, go ahead.
Who wanted to ask or to talk? Hassan?
Yes, okay. This is very good question, Ashraf. I think you did not actually shift from the main topics. It's just like we are exploring, thoughts and stuff. And in critical times where we have actually avant-gardist ideas. In my school, we set up social innovation lab. And we had, imagine within the pandemic, we had studios working on social innovation, and we had a rural poor community settlement as a living lab. And we set up a place where to co-construct sustainability scenarios with this village. And we chose in a primary school where we equipped with digital means to communicate with the members of the community. And we had actually participative approach via this communication kind of infrastructure, and it worked amazing. It worked amazing. Sometimes even distance is a blessing, because when you face them, they may be like shy, they may be that stuff. So they feel so comfortable. And then the analysis, the field analysis of the data that we did before the pandemic, and we did all the co-construction, co-design, participative approach in order to design the scenario of this sustainability within this rural village through technology, and it worked. And then after the pandemic, we started working on the master plan for sustainability scenario that was chosen to be the concrete ones. And this week I got really amazing funding for this project. We never have actually funding from the conception to the execution. And this is a project that is actually funded from the conception to the execution, and by co-constructing, co-designing, design thinking, etc. And this is just an instance. So there is nothing impossible, okay? It's just like how we adopt, and how we move on, okay?
Very good, very good. Any other thoughts on this, on community projects and how they were addressed or undertaken during the pandemic, or never, or?
I think it's not so much a question of whether they were undertaken during the pandemic as to the general, if you like, and very essential friction between what we determine in schools of architecture as educators as being beneficial to our students and graduates, and actually the inherent difficulty with which professional practice globally operates. Professional practice globally everywhere has got bigger. The idea of an atelier like that of Lou Kahn, for example, okay, I know he died broke and all the rest of it, but essentially before that point, there were some pretty glorious projects. But the idea of a small room in which about a dozen people operate and actually produce extraordinary work is completely dead. Now procurement patterns are such that all practices have to be big. So as all practices have to be big, they also have to be commercial. And I think we've got a major problem. I don't think the problem is framing the agenda in schools of architecture. I think we're really good at that. I think we're really, really good at it. I think the problem is trying to persuade practice to share and dream the bigger dreams, which they're so critical of schools of architecture. Commercial architects will always decry the vision of the School of Architecture as being unrealistic. No, it's not unrealistic. It's just that you can't sell it to a commercial client, as the principle of a commercial practice. And I think this is essentially our problem. I mean, essentially we're preempting, I think, the final question of the session, but it seems to me that the real problem is this thing, this big elephant in the commercial room, the construction industry. The construction industry is like the military industrial machine. You know, it's absolutely fundamentally conditions everything that our graduates do. And it limits actually what they can do. And whilst I think there's another question, maybe I'll come back to it, about broadening the program of the architectural project, it's redefining actually how graduates work. And I think our problem is the construction industry. And I've been pushing the notion of the progressive practitioner being an architect constructor for a very, very long time. And if you look at the work of brilliant architects like Anna Heringer, for example, whose practice embeds itself in communities and then designs and deliver those projects through the hands of that community, I think you're looking at a truly progressive kind of practice. And it's replicable in all kinds of contexts, as she's proved time and time again, and other practices like Carl Turner Associates in the UK, for example. We can change the pattern, but the problem at the moment, and I don't want to get into some kind of weak post-Marxist analysis, the problem is essentially one of capital, and the problem is that of the construction industry. If we were architect constructors, we cut all these issues about profit and capital and industrial structures and not being able to dream dreams that are relevant and socially inclusive and socially beneficial. We can cut these things out of the discussion and produce something that's genuinely accessible and worthwhile. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very, very much. Some of this is really very provocative also, because it really tried to go beyond the operational mode of architecture education and the way we see things. I want to move to the core question, really, which is about the future. And of course, many of the colleagues have touched on this. So moving beyond that emergency on transitional operational model, which took place during the pandemic, and we can say some of it is taking place at the moment, it is important to identify what opportunities we have. Is there a scope of opportunities? And as I say, some of you have mentioned about opportunities, but probably we need to capture more at the level of the curriculum, at the level of modes of communication, at the level of health and sustainable development goals challenges, at many levels. So where do you think the lessons for future opportunities lie in this process? So we learned a lot from last 2 years. And that learning generate opportunities for enhancing, improving, going forward with architecture education. So where do you see that? Where do you think these lessons lie or are? So yes, please.
Ashraf, do you mind if I chip in here? Is that okay?
Okay.
Thank you very much. I wanted to respond also to David's comments, and I think they're kind of interlinked. But I mean, we are discussing here all interrelated issues, anyways. Obviously, it was made clear that the pandemic, this process made existing inequalities, in education even worse, especially in geographies where access to the internet or technical tools are limited. I mean, in Turkey, this was perhaps more apparent in primary and secondary education, but rather than universities, but pretty close, I would say. But it nevertheless made life much more difficult for design students who live with crowded families in small apartments without good connection, and they had to share laptops with their siblings and whatnot. And this may sound more like of a third world problem, quote unquote, but there is one global tendency, I think, that poses a danger to all or most our endeavors for looking on the bright side and coming up with innovative or new solutions to these issues for the future of architectural education. And this is also, I mean, I don't think it's the only architectural practice that is the problem here, or mostly even. There are also the universities that are playing along. Don't you think? I mean, when you think of the increased commercialization and privatization of university education, that include architecture schools, right? And I think we can easily infer that this growing business, right, of online education may well be received as a means to cutting costs for certain university administrations rather than an alternative method of teaching and learning. So like disseminating certificates and programs without much effort, that is. So I think we need to, this seems to me like one of those critical moments in history where, coupled with the grand issues of climate change, public health, migration, poverty, of course, education is becoming less of a right than paid service in many places anyway. So any discussion, I think, relating to, for instance, enhancing the relationship with professional practice, right, need to keep such realities in mind. I think the question is how to define our politics of positionality, where do we stand as educators? For instance, how can we create opportunities for a low-tech approach, right, for blended education when we do not have high-tech tools? Or how can we learn from the everyday environments where all places then turn into classroom, perhaps, right, like design and build programs, rather than confining ourselves in our homes and only connect digitally. So I guess we need to utilize digital tools in online education critically and politically consciously, right? And I believe these are some of the main issues that we will be discussing and tackling in the next decade or so. And I think we need to enhance our efforts even more in adopting more creative solutions. So we not have the professional, we don't have only the professional practice, but also certain tendencies in university education that might be hindering all these efforts. I'm sorry, I'm not on the very optimistic side, but this is basically what's happened in the last 3 years.
This is one of the opportunities, and I just want to invite who raised their hands, Lindy, Hermie, and Christina. So please, in this order.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a short point, which is that I keep hearing that the expression publish or perish is dwindling in popularity. And that it's actually been superseded globally by this new expression, which was coined by the University of Michigan, partner or perish. And they're arguing that developing partnerships with the profession is critical, and in our instance with the profession of architecture, and it's critical both for our teaching and for our research. And we need to respond to the needs of practice, and as well as that, we need to actually help to lead the future of practice. So there's this kind of dichotomy of our responsibilities. And I believe that partnering with practice provides opportunities for funded commercial research, which certainly in Australia we're finding is becoming more and more difficult to access from government agencies, and particularly in a post-pandemic context. And through adopting this kind of partnership mindset, I believe that we can play a leading role in enhancing the economic vitality of our regions and our nations, and that we need to find new ways to forge these partnerships to generate a culture of risk and to make education and investment in entrepreneurship a priority. And to contextualize that, where I think a good starting place for us is taking some clues from the UIA, who declared this year, 2022, the Year of Design for Health. And they're advocating for architects around the world to explore how good design can contribute to security, healing, and well-being that goes well beyond healthcare facilities, but indeed is actually reaching our homes and our schools and our public spaces and our institutions. And I believe that there's some clues there in terms of what we can embed in terms of our research approach, and also what we're embedding in our teaching. And I really don't, to my mind, I can't separate what we do in research and teaching. I think the two need to be incredibly closely aligned. So that's just a bit of a teaser from my perspective.
Yeah, thank you very much. Hermie, please.
Yes, thank you. I would like to link back to what David said about our students and practicing in a different space. And I think when we take our students into live and design board students and we work with communities, it's a certain experience that they get, and they get a value out of that. The community gets a value out of that. But it's not always, or very seldom, taken forward into the professional space. And I think the challenge for me is to think, how are we going to equip our students to become self-sustainable in that practice space, not to go necessarily into the commercial space where there is security, there is money available, but how do we actually equip them while they are studying so that they know that they can practice in that space? And that they can find their own opportunities. I think in your introduction, Ashraf, you talked about students making their own opportunities. And if we can teach them how to make their own opportunities when they go out into practice, I think it will really move us forward. And I want to finish with just an observation about the lack of community participation in the commercial space. It doesn't exist there. And I don't think we see it as a space where we actually interact with community, because it is a commercial space. But I think there's also opportunities to explore there, because that's the space where one can make an impact on involving that community in thoughts about sustainability and how they use buildings and how they use their resources. We do that for communities that don't have a lot of resources, because those projects often they work with participation and collaboration, and there's cross-disciplinary, multidisciplinary aspects that happen in those community projects. And the community learns about sustainability as well. We don't do that in the commercial projects. And that's I think, a lack in this space. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Christina, please.
Very briefly, because most points have already been made by colleagues. But just to carry on this thing about what the reality is out there for practice and how universities are being challenged as well. I think very strongly, and we do see that in my department a lot, with a lot of projects that colleagues do in studios, both locally and internationally. For example, we have a project by a colleague in Bangladesh where they're looking at sustainability and infrastructure, sanitary infrastructure for communities that have very few resources. So the opportunity for education still to play a vital role in live projects rather than imaginary projects for individuals to do what they fancy as a designer. But this is also reflected in what I've seen with students. There's a thirst in students. There's a very lively social consciousness. There are so many challenges, and students are putting this forward themselves. I think that's very, very promising, and we can take lead from them. We've been encouraging our students to do their own groups and take initiatives, and you can see the very strong social agenda. We've got groups about gender, about race, about the environment. So the thirst is there, and we can only encourage and help them with all of that.
Thank you very much. Marlies, did you raise your hand? You wanted to say something?
I did, thank you. And I want to echo what Christina just said in terms of the activism that we're seeing in our students, in the context of, Lindsay talked about partnerships, right, as being critical or central to not just our research focus. I would say that partnerships, community partnerships, are becoming increasingly central to our pedagogical focus in the academy. I think students themselves with faculty, but really out of their own desire to do so, are finding an in-between space, a kind of liminality that allows them to define practice on their own terms. And I applaud that reality. I don't necessarily think that it's the product of pandemic thinking. I think this, like many other things, was already well underway before COVID. I do think that COVID in this instance, as in many instances, is accelerating changes that were already underway and in progress. But I think the faculty is taking a really interesting role in helping students articulate that liminality, and students are really taking the reins and moving forward with an entrepreneurial mindset to do work that they believe is important, is critical, the sort of the architecture of necessity, and making it very much their own. So that was that.
Thank you very much. Hassan, yes.
Please, Ashraf, I would just like add a little twist. And I know you are very involved in research about the innovative pedagogies for decades now, and I'm proud of you for doing so. And I think I will add a little twist to my colleagues. I think we cannot keep a classical curriculum since the academies, and suddenly the pandemic happened, and we started maneuvering within the same mindset and with the same box. And beyond the socially aware architecture as a new trend, which is ephemeral, I think we should think about the mutation of the notion of the project that is not anymore related to the silo of the building. And the key instance in this pandemic is the example of the hospital. The hospital as a concrete box is not anymore something that people, they may go there to find solution, especially with the COVID-19, the carrying capacity. So the problem is not the hospital, it's the hygiene. So how the hygiene issue would be very important in an urban ensemble. How the fragmented buildings that will create an intelligence to prevent the pandemic. Hence, the role of the architect is becoming obsolete because we educate our students about how to make that box with partie architecturale very aesthetic. Yes, of course, with high tech and thermal performance, energy performance, and all performances with S. But I think, Ashraf, I would cut my story short. The curricula of architectural education worldwide, they need to shift the paradigm of the focus. And this is why I fully agree with David. It's not just socially, like socialist agenda, human-centered, socially aware, pandemic stuff. I think we are facing a new era of the city is not anymore. Urbanization is dismantled. People now, they are running to the rural villages. And the ones they were living in a rural village in the pandemic, in the crisis, they were happier than someone in 50 square meters in New York, where the pizza shop is closed, while the other guy has his own potatoes next door. So therefore, I think there is a whole shift of paradigm of the physical setting and how it would be conceived beyond the box. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much, Hassan. We have basically 4 minutes to cover a couple of other points before we wrap up. So I would say, who wants to have a chance to basically reflect on what was said or add another insight or an additional point they want to make, please.
I could just pick up, I think, on Hassan's last comments, which I think is very interesting. The silo of the building. I mean, the reality is that the majority of schools of architecture are actually set in cities. There are very few schools of architecture that are in the middle of a desert or a forest. They're embedded in the urban condition. There's a curious kind of thing that the classical Bauhaus model, which we're still flogging to death, 120 years later, 100 years later, as something that was meant to be innovative and get rid of historicist classicism, which incidentally wasn't so bad. At least it made architects well-mannered. But that's another story. The interesting thing is most cities already have enough buildings, but we don't use them well. We frequently don't use them very well. And also we're obsessed with the idea of novelty and origination. And somehow the rite of passage for a graduate has to be the novel original project. And I think actually expanding the program of architecture is a kind of key thing. I mean, if you, one of the lessons that my colleagues and I learnt in dealing with schools in Latin America, which the RIBA had a lot of involvement with, is how broad-minded students were about what they did post-graduation. They didn't see themselves as moving into star offices necessarily. And this gave us many clues. If you think about design as a problem-solving entity, then it could be involved with matters of public health. You know, the health as the key generator of new urbanism. It could be about the design of the cultivated agricultural and non-agrarian landscape. It could be about engineering for energy. It could be about post-industrial urbanism. You know, how do you revive the city when the industry that was responsible for its generation is no longer there? So actually, apart from the moral, ethical, and genuine progressive professional issues, we need to redefine the breadth and depth of what an architect can do. You know, we're good at design solutions, it seems to me. You know, we're good at defining alternatives. And I think we need to promote this far more in architecture and education. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we actually we exceeded our time, and probably in terms of responding to questions, we're going to have to respond to them verbally. I mean, verbally in terms of after the session. We would like to conclude, and I would just want to wrap up by saying a couple of words. Basically, you're emphasizing critical issues, and I can see also emerging issues, like the point about architecture education and practice and how this can be taken forward was not discussed enough over the past 2 years. And I think this is an important point that is emerging out of this conversation. Of course, the issue of scale, the issue of the type of issues that Hassan was talking about is really very critical. The issue of the student potential, Christina was talking and Marlies was endorsing the idea of the social agenda that exists within the students is really very, within the student bodies, is very important. Before that, upskilling, empathy, mental health remain at the core of our discussions. Inclusivity remain at the core of our discussions. So I would say these insights are really very important. And I'm hoping, and this is a call probably for future effort of Epidemic Urbanism Initiative, that we go into documenting these events and make them, you know, available in a way or another. And because these are critical insights, and I thank all panelists for these excellent contributions. And I would say examining the potential of these opportunities is not a luxury. It's really part of the core of what we do, and it's a necessity and an obligation. So I will give the floor back to Kathleen and Mohammed. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to share my screen really quickly, and while I do, I just wanted to start with a really hearty thank you to our esteemed panelists and to you, Professor Salama, for facilitating this urgent and really lovely conversation. So thank you. I just wanted to share with the audience, if you would like to know about our initiative, Epidemic Urbanism, please find us online at epidemicurbanism.com. This conversation, as well as all other conversations that we've hosted over the last couple of years, will be available and are available on our YouTube channel at Epidemic Urbanism. You can just Google it. We also invite you, if you have not done so already, to join our community, by which we mean to join our email list. We send out monthly-ish emails letting you know what activities are coming up. So you see a bit.ly link on your screen. You can also use the QR code that you see there to add yourself to our email list.